Welcome to today's episode of A Journey to Tetelestai. I have been overwhelmed with seeing the fulfillment of God's promises in the Bible. We saw in our last episode that Jesus was the promised Messiah. In today's episode, we're going to see that he was also a fulfillment of a prophet who would arise in Israel. But he was much more than a prophet. We'll learn that he was the most unique human to ever grace this planet. He was God in human flesh. Let's see how we can know that.
People would come from far and wide just to see Jesus. And once, when Jesus was surrounded by a large crowd, Mark 6 says that he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time, it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." The disciples were shocked. It would take 8 months of a man's wages just to buy enough food for all the people. But then Jesus surprised them again by telling them to go out amongst the crowd and see how much food there was. They came back with only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. But not only that, it says the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. After the people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus did, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." God had promised that when the Messiah would come into the world, he would be a prophet, just like the prophet Moses, one who would give the people the word of God and set them free. And when they saw the miraculous sign that Jesus did, they said, "He's the one." And they were right. Jesus is the fulfillment of this prophecy. Jesus had come to give them the very words of God and to set them free from the powers of sin, death, and hell.
On several occasions, Jesus demonstrated that not only did he have power over sickness, but Jesus had complete power over death as well. In Revelation 1:18, Jesus said, "I hold the keys of death." Once, when Jesus was nearing the city of Nain, Luke 7:12 says, "A dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow." This widow was heartbroken over the loss of her son. Without a husband or a son, she had no one to provide for her. But Jesus had come to bring hope to the hopeless. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." He went up and touched the bier, and those carrying it stood still. He said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. The one who had breathed life into the first man in the garden had now spoken life into this dead man. Those in the funeral procession were all filled with awe and praised God. "A great prophet has appeared among us," they said. "God has come to help his people." Indeed, God had come. Just as the scriptures had foretold, they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us.
One thing the disciples soon realized was that Jesus not only had complete power and authority over sickness, death, and the spirit world, but that Jesus also had complete power and authority over the physical world as well. John 6 describes for us a terrifying storm that the disciples faced alone. The disciples had gone on ahead in their boat and then left Jesus behind on a mountainside to spend time alone in prayer with the Father. That night, the disciples battled the wind and the waves, only making it halfway across the lake. They were exhausted and without hope until, in the middle of the storm, they looked up and they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Then they were willing to take him into the boat. And immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Only God can calm a storm. Only God can give orders to the wind and the waves, and they obey him. Only God can walk on the water, and only God is worthy of our worship.
As you examine the 4 biographies written about Jesus, you will find that his life demonstrated that he was, in fact, God. In the Old Testament, when God described himself to his people, he used such terms as king, judge, light, rock, redeemer, creator, the giver of life, the one who speaks with divine authority, and the one who has the ability to forgive sins. In the New Testament, every single one of these terms is applied to Jesus. As Jesus said in John 14:7, "If you really knew me, you would know my Father as well." In John 10:30, Jesus said, "I and the Father are one." In John 8:58, Jesus proclaims that he is eternal. In Matthew 28:18, Jesus affirms that he is all-powerful. And in Matthew 28:20, Jesus declares that he is all-present. Jesus, number 1, claimed to be God. Number 2, had the attributes of God. And number 3, accepted worship as God.
One day, Jesus asked his disciples a question. He said, "Who do the crowds say I am?" The disciples answered that the crowds had various opinions as to Jesus' identity. And you know, today the same is true. People are still discussing and divided over who Jesus is. Jesus made the question more personal when he asked his disciples, "But what about you? Who do you say I am?" Jesus knew that every individual would have to choose whether they would believe Jesus' claims or not. You also must make this decision. Who do you believe that Jesus is? If you need to, take more time to study the eyewitness biographical accounts of Jesus' life found in the Bible. And as you study Jesus' claims and the miracles that authenticate his claims, you also must come to a conclusion. For Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples, in light of all the overwhelming evidence he had witnessed in Jesus' life, he had no doubt as to who Jesus was. Verse 16 says, Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God."
Who do you say that Jesus is? I say with my entire heart, he is the Son of the living God. He is the Messiah, the Deliverer. He is truly God come in human flesh. Since we've been on this journey, I've told you on several occasions that I began to follow Jesus when I was a university student. I'll never forget that evening. It was the greatest moment of my life. It changed everything. I heard a man speak about Jesus, who he is, and what he can do in our lives. I was confronted with my spiritual condition and the darkness that filled my heart. I reached into the deepest part of my heart and I pulled out faith. I believed in Jesus. He is the Son of God. I cried out, "I believe in you, Jesus." I have never been the same since that evening. However, my friends and my family were left with questions. They may be some of the same questions that you have. Some of my friends said, "Sammy, this is just emotional. You'll be back to the same person in just a couple of weeks." One of my friends said, "Sammy, forget about this. At least for this weekend, let's go down to the beach or the Gulf Coast. There'll be a lot of girls, we'll have lots of alcohol, and it'll be a great time." I told my friends, this is not some emotional experience that will pass in a couple of weeks. I can't go to the coast with you. I have met the Son of God. He has changed my life, and I'll never be the same. One of my friends laughed, thinking that this was an emotional experience that would pass soon. My family also had questions. My mother thought that I had been brainwashed by religious zealots because of the changes that had taken place in me. Some of my family harbored poor racial attitudes. I had the same attitudes before I placed my faith in Jesus. One of the great miracles that took place that night was that God changed my racial attitudes. No one told me to change them. Jesus just changed me. I started meeting with other young people of other races and developed a relationship with them. I shared the love of Jesus with them. My mother became so angry that she said I had been brainwashed by Martin Luther King. I said, "No, Mom, I haven't been brainwashed by Martin Luther King. I have been heart-washed by the King of Kings, Jesus, the Son of the living God." It has been 58 years since I placed my faith in Jesus. Emotions don't last that long, but the Spirit of God is eternal, and He came to live in me when I decided to follow Jesus. Oh, I know in whom I have believed, and I know that He is able to keep that which I've committed to Him because He is God. Who do I say that Jesus is? the Son of the living God. Who do you say that Jesus is? You must make a decision. Believe in Him. Call upon Him. Follow Him. When you do, you will never be the same. I'm not.